Hello, I'm Liz Hickey, Director of Communications here at the Pensions Regulator, and I'd really like to thank you all for joining our webinar today to discuss our equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. It's great to see so many of you in attendance for such an important topic and on such a lovely, hot and sunny day as well. I'm sure many of you will have already heard about and hopefully read our EDI strategy, which we launched a few weeks ago. Through our strategy, we are clear on our ambition for positive and lasting change. It sets out how we will embed diversity and inclusion across our own organisation and how we will support our regulated community to do the same, so that together we can drive down inequality amongst savers. Over the next hour and a half, you'll hear a series of conversations where we're going to discuss each of our strategic aims in more detail. We're going to look at some of the work that's already started and also outline our ambition for the work that needs to be achieved. You'll have the opportunity to submit your questions and comments to us as we go along, and we'll answer any of those in our Q&A session towards the end of our time together. So here's a quick run through of what we're going to be covering today. I'm delighted that our Chief Executive, Charles Council, will be joining us to say a few words. And then we're going to hear from Matt Adams, our Senior Media and Parliamentary Manager, and he's going to be asking David Fairs, our Executive Director of Regulatory Policy, Analysis and Advice, and myself about the drivers behind our strategy. Our Diversity Network chairs will discuss our first aim, giving us some insight into why networks are an important way to change culture, because our first aim is to really look at ourselves as an employer and see what we can do better and differently. And then you're going to hear from our newly appointed chair, Sarah Smart, and she's going to be talking about our second aim, focusing on how and why we're going to use our position and influence to build a collective understanding of pensions inequalities. David Fairs will then introduce our third and final aim, inviting two external speakers, Kim Brown from Legal and General and Harris Rye from Capital Cranfield, to talk about the work they've been doing as part of our D&I industry-led working group. The final session will be your opportunity to ask questions and submit comments to our panel. I'd also like to draw your attention to our feedback questionnaire, which is now available at the top of the menu to the left-hand side of the video player. Please do fill this out before you leave, even if you can't stay with us until the end, because we really appreciate the feedback so we can make our events even better in the future. I hope that you find this webinar engaging and informative. You can start submitting your questions now for the Q&A session. Please type your questions into the box below this video player. You will need to minimise the player if you're watching in full screen. I'd now like to hand over to Charles Council, our Chief Executive.
Thanks, Liz. Hello and a very warm welcome. As Liz mentioned, we'll be focusing on our equality, diversity and inclusion strategy today, which complements the suite of plans and strategies we've recently published. Taken together, they underpin and direct our drive to make workplace pensions work for savers, to put savers at the heart of what we do, and reflects our ambition in our corporate strategy and the actions we're taking to change the way that we work. You'll have learned by the tenor and tone of those documents that we are actively changing the way that we work. We're repurposing ourselves and the perception of our role. We intend to provide leadership and intellectual challenge to the wider pensions industry, offering vision and oversight alongside our regulatory obligations. Our ED&I strategy poses our most recent and I think obvious question to industry, which is, are you truly mindful and supportive of the whole of your market? Or, put another way, what are you doing to ensure all savers are considered and provided opportunities that are meaningful to them? Social and cultural progress has overtaken many of the traditional practices and values of the pensions industry. You might say it runs the risk of being outpaced, left struggling to maintain its authority as attitudes and behaviours change. Our ED&I strategy recognises this shift, considering those changes in tandem with the structural changes in the industry, like, for instance, automatic enrolment and the increase in DC saving. It aspires to build on those moments over time to direct, influence, and persuade industry to embrace the benefits of diversity. Change we're seeking is large, but we've set what we believe are achievable milestones. We want to bring others with us over time, rather than insisting on immediate acceptance of our proposition. We also want to challenge ourselves as an employer. We must increase the diversity of our staff, especially at senior levels, to better reflect the communities we serve and we are part of, and also to improve the experience of working for TPR. It's simple, isn't it? Work is a huge part of our lives. It must feel inclusive. No one wants to spend that time feeling like an outsider, not welcome, even awkward or ashamed. We must make more effort to recognise the benefits of a diverse workforce. We must also be respectful of every individual, ensuring everyone has equal access and equal opportunity. We must include rather than exclude. Our strategy will encourage us to look at our actions and attitudes and encouraging kindness and empathy. So today, I'd like to introduce a series of conversations that I hope will encourage you to have your own. Making this kind of change will require us to look at ourselves as well as looking at others. Look, it's a sensitive and it's a delicate challenge. It will take time, it will take assured leadership, and it will take resources. Liz Hickey and David Fairs are the co-sponsors of our ED&I strategy within TPR. And we're going to begin by asking them about the strategy and its meaning for us. So I'd like now to hand over to Matt Adams, our Senior Media and Parliamentary Manager, who will be hosting this session.
Thank you, Charles. As Charles said, our EDI strategy aims to bring about meaningful change both to TPR and throughout the industry, to challenge the perception that the pensions community is too traditional and outdated, and to encourage better support for everyone, whatever their background. So can I start by asking, why is TPR introducing the EDI strategy now? What's important about this moment in time, and what are the drivers? David, can we come to you first?
As a regulator, we've been talking about diversity of trustee boards and the fact that diverse trustee boards make better decisions and improve governance for over 5 years now, actually before I joined the pensions regulator. But over that time, we've seen some pension schemes have struggled to recruit member-nominated trustees. We've seen an increase in sole professional corporate trustees. And in some ways, that's diminished diversity within trustee boards. Although since we've been talking about it on platforms, it's good to see that the Association of Professional Pension Trustees included diversity and inclusion in their code of conduct. They've also set up a diversity and inclusion committee. And we're also seeing some professional trustee firms that are now starting to recruit more diverse groups. But I think within the regulated industry, there's a groundswell of opinion, there's a momentum for change, that the regulated community does want to improve the diversity and inclusion of trustee boards. So I think by getting involved in that, by supporting, by encouraging change, by legitimizing it, we can create sustainable change within trustee boards. So I think there is a moment in time, I think now is the right time to actually help and support what the regulatory industry is trying to do for itself. And as a regulator, I think we have made quite a lot of progress on gender equality within the organisation, but there are areas where we've still got quite a lot to do. We have a need for greater representation from the minority ethnic community, from people with different sexual orientation at senior levels of group. And I think if we are saying to our regulated community that diverse trustee boards make better decisions, it clearly follows that an SLT level, at ExCo, at board level, having diversity is going to make us make better decisions. I think it's only fair to those within TPR that they have equal opportunity to rise through the ranks and get to senior levels. And of course, we as an organisation are not making the most of the talent that's out there, recruiting the best talent, if we don't have that representation at senior levels.
Thanks, David. And Liz, over to you with the same question. I mean, clearly, the industry's changed a huge amount in recent years. COVID has added extra pressures and perhaps has opened up other opportunities for change. What's your view on the timing of the strategy?
Yeah, so obviously the last couple of years that we've all lived through with a global pandemic, meaning that we've been working remotely in our lofts, kitchens, bedrooms, on ironing boards, it's really brought into sharp focus the role of an employer in holding a community of people together. And we've done a lot of listening and talking to our TPR community over the last couple of years while we've been working separately. And in some ways, that community is stronger than ever. And part of what we want to build is a really inclusive place to work, because that's the way that we can make the most of the talent that we have. And we won't only attract brilliant people, they will also stay when they get here. And for us, it is really important that we walk the walk. You know, it's not enough to go out there and tell other people how to organise themselves. We have to look at ourselves, and we haven't always got it right as an employer, and we're learning. And if you look over the sort of last 12 months or so, you've seen social movements really bring diversity, equality, and inclusion issues into sharp focus. And I think, you know, we wanted to be very clear to our people where we stood, and the kind of organisation that we want to lead and build with them. And obviously, as a regulator, the savings population has hugely diversified, as automatic enrolment has seen millions more people saving into a pension for the first time. So if people running schemes are going to make decisions on behalf of that increasingly diverse pool of savers, then it follows that actually a diverse board or diverse people running schemes will mean that they make decisions on behalf of that whole kind of population of savers that they're trying to deliver good outcomes for. So I think that's why now for us.
Okay, thanks. We'll hear more later on from others on how change can be delivered on the ground. But can you elaborate on the key aims of the strategy and how, from an operational point of view, it'll form an integral part of TPR's new mantra, if you like, to put savers at the heart of all we do? Perhaps, Liz, we can come to you first.
Sure. So following on from what I was saying about the kind of employer that we want to be, we want to become and must become more diverse. So that's the first strategic aim of our equality, diversity and inclusion strategy, is to be a fair, diverse and inclusive employer. And what that means is not only do we attract people from all walks of life, we also create the right environment for our people to thrive and be their best self. And we really want everybody that comes to work at TPR to feel safe, supported and celebrated throughout their career. So in terms of what that really means, in our first year of this strategy, we want to look at our values and behaviours framework to really start putting the building blocks in place. I mean, we've done some good things over the last few years. We're not starting from a complete standing start, but there is more that we need to do to really build a culture that works for everybody. We want to tackle inequalities, so we're setting really ambitious benchmarks and targets. We want to increase the diversity of our workforce by 20% across underrepresented groups. That includes Black and ethnic minorities, our LGBT community, and those with disabilities by 2025. And as part of that, we're going to review our internal pay and recruitment policies so that we can really kind of kick the tires and make sure that they are helping us achieve what we want to in this space. And I should just say that although when we talk about diversity, there's a range of protected characteristics under law, what we also want to do is look wider than that and look at other areas where people might be challenged. So if they have caring responsibilities, for example, socioeconomic background or neurodiversity. And clearly people's lives are complicated. You're not kind of put in a category and that's where you stay. People will have multiple either challenges or a mix of challenge and disadvantage. So that intersectional approach to tackling diversity and building a really inclusive culture is very important to us.
Great, thanks, Liz. David, could we just jump ahead to the third strategic aim? I mean, Liz has talked about the work of the regulator as an employer. Would you just elaborate on the aim to promote high standards of diversity and inclusion amongst our regulated community?
Yeah, so part of that is around improving the diversity of trustee boards. And last year I did a blog on how inclusivity is actually a fundamental part of improving diversity on trustee boards. So we want to get a broader range of people coming forward as trustees. Following our consultation on governance and trusteeship, which we responded to in February last year, we asked for volunteers to help us on that journey of how we could make a change. I'm pleased to say we've now got over 70 volunteers who've come forward. We've got 4 different work streams that are working on different aspects of how we might drive change. So some are looking at the data that's available around diversity of trustee boards. How can we get that data? Where can we gather it? And so how can we measure that we're making progress? Also looking at best practice. What are the areas of best practice? Are there practices that some trustee boards have used that have attracted different types of people to become trustees? What made them successful? But what are also the barriers of doing that? So we have 4 different work streams that the volunteers are working on. We're supporting them. We're supporting the chairs of those groups. And what we want to come out of that is some very clear objectives, some clear action plans of how we can make progress. So our aim really is to facilitate and support the change that the industry already wants to make and make that sustainable and achievable. It's really incredibly encouraging to see the enthusiasm and the ambition that's coming from those working groups. So that is a bit of our strategy that we're very much working in tandem with the industry to try and drive sustainable change.
Okay, thank you. And then finally on the strategic aim 2, perhaps you could both just touch on this one and just remind, this is to build a collective understanding of why pensions inequalities occur, and within our remit, work in partnership with others, to reduce them. Liz, would you like to just pick that one up?
Sure. So this really kind of reinforces what David was saying about us working in partnership with other people. Now, as a regulator, we have our statutory objectives, we have a clear regulatory remit, and maybe getting out there and trying to tackle some of the root causes of pensions inequality is not something that is central to that regulatory remit. However, we feel that it's incumbent on us to work in partnership with other organisations to really get out there and try to understand why pension inequalities are perpetuated through the system, often from people's working lives, and what we could do, what role could we play in partnership with other people to reduce those inequalities. As an organisation, we are here to deliver good outcomes for savers. And I don't think that you could separate inequalities in the system from really delivering and driving those good outcomes. So this is where we want to go beyond our public sector equality duty, and we're getting towards the edge of what we as a regulator maybe kind of consider our immediate purview, but we want to work with experts and we want to work in partnership with others to really get under the skin of this issue and see what role we could play in helping to reduce inequality for savers.
Okay, thanks. And David, was there anything else to add on that one?
Yeah, so I think we already know that women tend to build up fewer retirement assets than men. People from minority ethnic backgrounds tend to have less, people who are disabled, people who are carers. And I think it's going behind what are the drivers for that? Are there things in the way that people are encouraged to sign up to pension schemes, encouraged to remain in there and encouraged to pay? So really it's around the framework. It's looking about how those people are communicated with. Could we communicate differently in different ways to try and encourage them to save more? So we know some of the issues. I don't think we fully understand all the drivers that are behind that. And as Liz said, this is about working with other parties in government, with the industry to try and understand those things much better and then drive change from that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Final question. How do you see TPR's role in promoting equality, diversity and inclusion as an organisation, as an employer and as a regulator? I mean, how do you balance those roles, and are there any points of tension there? David, perhaps we could come to you first on that one.
And I think it's very important that we do drive change in our regulated community. The data that we do have suggests that trustee boards are not as diverse as they could be. And as Liz said, with automatic enrolment, we've now got a much broader range of people saving into pension schemes. So it's really important that we do make changes within governing bodies who are making decisions on behalf of those savers. And as I say, actually, if you have a diverse trustee board, they're going to make better decisions, they're going to have better debates, they're going to produce better governance. And we have some evidence that that is the case. So it's clear that if we're going to improve the governance of pension schemes, we've got to do that. But as a regulator, we can't just preach to our regulated community. We've got to drive the change ourselves. But actually, as an employer, as Liz was saying, we need to attract the best talent into the organisation. We need to encourage people who perhaps haven't thought about a role within the pensions industry to do that, people who hadn't thought about coming to work for a regulator. How can we reach out to the talent out there and make it attractive for them to come and want to work with us? And that's going to improve our performance as a regulator. So some of this is about being fair to some of the individuals that are already within the regulator who perhaps don't have the lived experience working with us as others do. So there's a piece that's about being fair and reasonable and giving everybody the opportunity to make the most of the talents that they've got. But equally, if we're going to be a well-run regulator that's making the best regulatory decisions, we need a broad range of people to contribute to the debate, to making those decisions. So it will enable us to operate better, to make better decisions and to produce better governance ourselves. And I think our regulated industry would expect us to do that. We've been quite honest and quite transparent. There are some areas where we can be quite proud, I think, of the things that we've done, but we also recognise that there are things that we've got to do to make changes to improve the way that our offer is made available to employees as an employer. So I think it's really important, actually, that the two are considered together.
Yeah. And Liz Davies obviously talked a lot there about leading by example. How much work does TPR have to do in this area? I mean, are we a long way down the road, or are we doing quite well?
Well, the good thing is that our people really care about this and they really want us to get it right. So we have really active staff networks from various groups around the organisation: Women's Network, Disability Network, Minority Ethnic Network, and LGBT Network. We also have Time to Change champions who support people with mental health challenges. So we have a lot of people who want to get behind us and really help us drive this forward. I mean, we are not as diverse as we should be in the senior levels of the organisation. So even if we attract in brilliant people, why don't they stay? Why don't they stay and progress with us and build a career here? How can we make sure that there's real equality of opportunity to do exciting bits of work that can help you build your career? If we are recruiting from professions that in themselves aren't that diverse, who can we work with to maybe tackle some of those root causes of lack of diversity in some of those professions when we're bringing people in to work with us? How can we work more closely with our local community? How can we work with schools and colleges and reach those kids who might not have thought about working in a regulator or working in the professions, or might think that they have to go to university or it costs a lot of money? What can we do? So we do brilliant stuff. We do mentoring and we do apprenticeships, and we've worked really hard to put the staff voice at the heart of our thinking on this. But as they've advised us in a very wise way, it's a marathon and not a sprint. And we've got to really show and demonstrate that we're making progress and that we're making progress together. And we're really excited about it because I think that it's an important first step, publishing a strategy, but really you've got to get the work done now. So we want to roll our sleeves up and really get to work.
Liz, David, thank you very much for giving that excellent overview of the EDI strategy. I'm now going to hand the hosting baton back over to you, Liz, to introduce the chairs from our diversity networks. They're going to share with us some of the work they've done so far and the work we'll be doing together to continue to build an inclusive culture at TPR.
Thanks, Matt. We're lucky enough to have an established and valued number of diversity networks at TPR. Their work takes on various forms and their contributions inform and affect not only our policies, but our culture and our values too. Whether they're bringing issues to our attention, representing the views of their members, or organising social events, Their focus and dedication mean that colleagues can be sure of an advocate, a mentor, or a friend. As an organisation, we're striving to become more diverse and create the right environment for our people to thrive and be their best selves. Our networks will be key in helping us achieve this. So in this part of the webinar, we're going to explore what this might mean. How can we make the most of the opportunities, and how we must spot and address risks, and also how we can continue to build on some of the progress that we've already made. I'd like to welcome and introduce Tess Craven, co-chair of our Women's Network, Dan Menhinnitt, a member of our Proud Network, Alicia Thompson, chair of our Time to Change Network, Lisa McCready, chair of our Minority Ethnic Network, and David Walker, chair of our Disability Network. A very warm welcome to you all. I'd like to start off by asking each of you to give us a little bit of background about your network. And Tess, I'm going to come to you first to answer this. We'd really like to hear a little bit about how the Women's Network was formed.
Thanks, Liz. So we've had a Women's Network at TPR since 2015, so we're well established. Our aim is to support a culture of equality, inclusion and respect for all staff, and to enable and equip women at the Regulator to reach their full potential. We're sometimes asked why we're a women's network and not a gender network. There are a couple of reasons for this. So I think it's widely accepted by employers and government that there's a strong business and economic case for gender parity in the UK's workforce. And it's also recognised that women experience gender-based discrimination more than men. But at the Women's Network in TPR, we recognise that men are an integral part of the solution and play a big role in shifting our culture and promoting gender equality.
Why do you think having diversity networks are an important way to change culture? And I wondered if you had any examples of work you might have done at TPR so far.
So, as I said, the Women's Network have been around for quite a long time at TPR. And in that time, we've done lots of stuff to help people access networking, training and mentoring opportunities. Here at TPR, our data for gender shows that we've got a strong balance. I think it's 51% females and 49% males overall. And at senior leadership level, we have 57% female representation, although I'm not sure the 7% how that works. But it's great that this is where we're at, because gender balanced organisations deliver better and more sustainable performance. But even in this environment, there's still a lot of work to be done, and particularly since lockdown, where research has shown that this has had a disproportionate impact on women in terms of things like caring responsibilities, as well as financially. So the Women's Network have been an extremely important research source for employers since we all began working from home. It's provided an important safe space to get support outside of line management. It's a place to share and help others. We've focused a lot on facilitating wellbeing events over the past year, which have helped create a network of women across the business that might not otherwise have had contact with each other. During this time, we've also worked closely with HR to develop the menopause policy and some associated guidance that comes with that. It sets out what managers might do to support those going through the menopause, and also from an employee's perspective, what you can expect from TPR if you're experiencing symptoms. This is an example of a policy that Women's Network members lobbied for and got really involved in drafting. And I think it's examples like these that really show that it's more and more possible to bring your whole self to work.
And I suppose we've heard a bit about the great work that the Women's Network has already got underway at TPR. How do you think we can continue to build on the progress and maybe better spot risks and address them early on?
So the Diversity Network chairs and committee members get involved in a voluntary basis, and together we bring lots of energy, and we're all really keen to go that extra mile to make sure that TPR is a really good place to work. We're all committed to ensuring that the concerns of our workforce are reflected in the way that TPR develops. And I think I speak for us all to say that we aim to ensure that diversity and inclusion aren't simply an aim, but they're part of everything that we do. I think the creation of the ED&I strategy, the committee and soon to be lead are such a good opportunity to harness this energy, and also to ensure that there are systems and processes in place for when networks all their members identify risks and opportunities.
That's great. Thanks so much, Tess. And Dan, I'm going to come to you now, and I wondered if you could just give us a little bit of background and information about our Proud network at TPR.
Thanks, Liz. Proud is TPR's LGBT+ network. We work with TPR to ensure it's a diverse and inclusive workplace and is seen as such by our local community in Brighton and also the regulatory community that we support. We provide confidential support and help for our members and colleagues on LGBT+ issues, and we're committed to promoting a culture of inclusion and trying to increase the overall understanding of the issues that LGBT+ people face, both in work and outside. And we work with local charities to support and promote LGBT issues and interests.
And why do you think having diversity networks can be an important way to change culture? And do you have some examples of work that Proud has already done that might have helped us improve our culture at TPR?
Well, I think variety isn't just the spice of life, it's the stuff of life. It's far, far too easy to surround yourself with people who reflect who you are and how you look, how you like to work, your strengths, and very often your weaknesses as well. So what we try and do with Proud is educate TPR on issues that LGBT staff are facing, as well as our community's history, struggles, and our triumphs. In our regular newsletters and podcasts, we've covered subjects from conversion therapy to LGBT TV history. We try and be a critical friend for TPR. We want to provide insights that help improve its policies. And our committee are always available to provide honest, constructive feedback to improve training materials and HR policies. One of our most important jobs has to be to represent the interests of our members. We help them speak clearly and persuasively to the business, making sure that their views are heard. And we also want to build a community. Even during a pandemic, we were still ready to party or watch films or discuss books or throw shade at Love Island celebrities. We hold a lot of different types of events because they're fun, but also because bringing people together builds a strong community.
Thank you for talking to us about the brilliant work the network has been doing. And I know our networks have been particularly important over the last 12 months as we've all been working remotely and a bit more isolated than we would normally be. I wondered if you had any ideas of how we could continue building on this progress and also how we could get better as an organisation at spotting risks and addressing them early on.
Well, I think it would be really easy just to say throw cash at it, but I actually think there's a tremendous amount of goodwill from TPR's staff, and the organisation should definitely take advantage of this. But what can be hard is juggling the day job with your network work, and that might be off-putting to some people whose views we might really want to hear. So potentially avoiding that risk, we could create a more formalised structure for the networks, which might help us coordinate, even though we are already doing this, but coordinating it better, things can always be improved, and also communicating more with the executive. I think that would create a much more robust and diverse, inclusive forum for views. And also it sends quite a powerful message that the networks are here to stay. They're not rested on one individual who may come and then leave again. We want really to make sure that we can provide opportunities for everyone across the organisation to play the part that they want to play in it. Book clubs aren't everyone's cup of tea, but something else might be. And it's really making sure that everyone in TPR understands that they can be part of this as well. And I think that would be one of the best ways that we could make sure that there's a firm foundation for the future.
That's great. Thanks so much, Dan. And Alicia, I wondered if I could talk to you and you could give us a bit of background on our Time to Change network and talk a little bit about the work that you do.
Thank you. Yeah, so TPR signed up to the Time to Change pledge in 2016, so it's been around a little while. We are a group of volunteers and we're just people who are passionate about making TPR somewhere you can be honest about mental health, whether it's your own or someone else's, and the impact that's having on you without any fear, without any anxiety around negative consequences about that. And we do that through offering one-to-one support as a listening service to people. And then we raise awareness through comms and events around TPR.
And I'm going to ask you a similar question to the one I asked the others. Why do you think having our diversity networks can have such a beneficial effect on our culture? And I wondered if you had some examples you might want to talk to us about the work Time to Change has done.
Great, yeah. So I think the first thing is around support. going into work and finding people who you identify with, particularly if you don't feel represented in the kind of dominant figures around the organisation. I remember very vividly the first time I heard a story that resonated with my own, and I would have never heard that if it weren't for the safe space created by a network meeting. It's so important to be able to find those connections in the workplace. And those connections empower us to become kind of change creators when you can sit there and say to your colleague, yeah, that's a great idea, you should do that. And that really helps us be effective. The other thing is that they give us sort of a platform and status so we can open doors. An example of this is when we recently went out and talked to around 35 teams at TPR. We're aiming to speak to all. We've got, I think, a few to go. And that was on a small group level. And we had these really powerful and moving conversations in small groups about mental health. And we couldn't have gotten in those teams without that status. We've also done things like work with HR to put in place a safeguarding policy. And we run monthly workshops on wellbeing. And all of that is only possible because of the formal network platform we've got.
Thank you. And I know that the Time to Change champions have been a real resource and support to lots of people around the organisation. I mean, it has been a very challenging time for many of our people and for people outside of TPR, of course, over the last 18 months. So how do you think we could build on the progress and the great work that you've been doing? And again, how could we get better at spotting risks early and addressing them early on?
Yeah, so I think there's about 3 things we can do. The first is around empowering and encouraging managers to use their teams. I think my experience is that cultural change happens when there are regular conversations happening amongst kind of safe groups of trusted peers in those relationships. And I think teams have so much potential for those conversations. So I think there's a piece around just encouraging and building space for managers to do that work. The second thing really is around how we work together as networks and just getting the most out of the lived experience of networks. As people have alluded to, we do this around our desk jobs, and we want to get our members' views when we're asked to give input. So it's really helpful for us if we get really high level and early input into any work where you do want the networks to have a view. And the webinar has actually been a really good example of that. So thank you to everyone who's done that. But yeah, working together well, I think, is the other piece. Finally, I think it's just around refining what we do versus what HR does. And I think the more clarity we have around those roles, the more effective we can all be.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Licia. Lisa, I wondered if you could talk to us about our minority ethnic network, a bit of background on how the network was formed and some of the work that you do for TPR.
Thanks, Liz. So the ME network was established in 2018, and our aims are to encourage and support the recruitment, retention and development and progression of ethnic minority staff, to promote an inclusive culture within TPR by enhancing the lived experiences of ethnic minority employees and encouraging cultural exchange to understand and celebrate our differences, and to drive objective, measurable and tangible change within TPR through encouraging accountability, influencing tone from the top, and encouraging visible, inclusive leadership that goes beyond words into real change.
That's great, thank you. And you and I have talked about how increasing diversity is one thing, but building that inclusive culture is really crucial if we want to attract great people and also keep them and help them build careers with us. So why do you think that having a diversity network can be such a kind of have such a beneficial impact on our culture? And I wondered if you'd like to talk about some examples of the work that the ME network has done already in TPR.
I think having diversity networks recognises the importance of having a community of people who understand and support one another. We strive to provide a safe space for minorities and allies to share and learn from each other's lived experiences. This has enabled the network to ensure that the voices of our members are heard and to raise awareness around potential discriminatory issues. Some of the things that we've been up to recently include running a series of sessions across the organisations in relation to microaggressions. We hold regular coffee mornings with our members. We also recently conducted a survey of our members regarding their lived experiences of working at TPR, and we fed back the findings of that survey to our senior management team, which in turn has helped to drive the ED&I strategy. We've been advocating for action regarding the ethnicity pay gap, and we recently facilitated a training session on building rapport with colleagues from different cultures. I
think that the networks have done a fantastic job. at really sort of bringing to light and bringing home the lived experience of people at TPR and really making us stop and think about what we could do better and what we must do better to support our people effectively. So I wondered if you had thoughts on how we could build on some of the progress already made and how we could spot and address things more quickly so that we can really make sure that people feel supported and celebrated at work.
I think it's important to recognise that the networks can't act alone in delivering the changes that TPR need to make. We're a group of committed and passionate volunteers, but I think if we want real change, we're going to have to reach out across the organisation and ensure that everyone understands their role in ED&I and how they can help to deliver the change we need to make. I recently went to a Women in Pensions talk and had the pleasure of hearing Dr. Maggie Sempler speaking. And one of the things that she said that really stuck with me was, and I'm summarising what she said, but essentially she said that change can often rely on the same 15% of people within an organisation, but the organisations that have made real progress with ED&I have found a way to reach and empower the roughly 60% of people within organisations that really want to help and support change, but just don't know what role they want to play in making that change. And I think that's one of TPR's biggest challenges as we try and embed the strategy. How can we reach that 60% of people and understand and really kind of help them to support everyone across the organisation in making that change and deliver real long-lasting change?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got so much goodwill and good intentions, but it's about how we really turn that into practical action and help people feel included and empowered to really help us shift the dial. Thank you so much, Lisa. And finally, David, and I should say it's not and finally because David is at the bottom of my list, it's because we've been talking to our networks in the order in which they were formed at TPR, and our disability network is our newest network, relatively speaking. So David, I wondered if you could talk to us a bit about the disability network and some of the work that you do.
Certainly, Liz, thank you. Well, as Liz said, the Disability Network was founded recently. It was founded last year at the start of the pandemic. We've been planning it for a while, but COVID gave us some additional incentive to get up and running so we could better support colleagues. Now, we've just under 40 members, including individuals with visible and invisible impairments, carers and others, and equally welcome those without impairments. So our aim is to support a diverse working environment that encourages a culture of respect and inclusion and delivers fairness and equality to everyone, regardless of their...
And even though you've only been in existence for a relatively short time, I know you've already achieved some really great things as a network. And so I wondered what your thoughts were on why having diversity networks can have such a positive impact on culture. And if you could give us some of those examples of the good work the network has done.
Certainly. So the inclusion networks at TPR across the board are really important vehicles for change through their activities improve both our culture and the overall working environment. As far as the Disability Network is concerned, our primary role is to support colleagues with any form of impairment or those connected to them, whether it's through our identification and escalation of issues that impact upon our constituency, such as the inconsistent use of the guaranteed interview scheme, or straightforward matters, such as the justification used in our letters to MPs, which for some visual conditions make them very difficult to read. We strive to improve the experience of every person with a disability when they work inside or interact with TPR. We've provided advice to externally facing colleagues that the simple act of asking if everyone they're trying to interact with can participate in any meetings, or if they need any reasonable adjustments, such as simple access to printed versions of documents ahead of time, makes our work both more effective and helps to make us a regulator that really pays attention to the needs of its internal and external communities.
And I wondered how you thought we might be able to build on the progress that you've made already, and again, how we could get better at spotting any issues early so that we can really address them before they negatively impact our people.
Okay. I'd echo what we've already heard from my fellow chairs, really. The networks play a crucial role, as through their memberships, they're able to identify matters or highlight options that need rectifying or just avoiding. if we are to evolve into the diverse, inclusive and equal organisation that the ED&I strategy gives us a clear view that we're seeking to become. For me, the organisation should do everything it can to support the work of the networks and engage with them so it is as fully informed of matters of concern as it's possible to be. It's a really useful form of business intelligence. TPR must strive to address any concerns raised to foster the best possible environment for both colleagues and for our wider regulated communities.
Thank you, David. And I really want to thank all of you for giving up your time to talk to me about the work of the networks. I can't stress enough how valuable your input and support has been as we build our EDI strategy, and of course how much we're going to rely on all of you as we start to take it forward and really turn it into action. I think we're very lucky at TPR that we have people who are not just passionate about pensions, but also really passionate about our people and about helping us build a community where everybody feels safe, supported and celebrated at work. So thank you so much for your support and for your time today. In this next section of the webinar, our chair, Sarah Smart, and I will be discussing our second aim, how and why TPR will seek to use our position and influence to build a collective understanding of pensions inequalities. We will consider how we might, by working with others, recognise and reduce these inequalities. We'll look at our recruitment of non-executive directors to our board, the challenges of increasing diversity, and the challenges to maintain a balance between experience and new perspectives. We have a unique position as the UK's sole pensions regulator. The soft power of influence and thought leadership can be as persuasive as our regulatory authority, and we feel it would be a really missed opportunity if we didn't seek to capitalise on that to bring about positive change. Gaining from role models, encouraging good behaviours, pooling the collective resources of colleagues, building trust and evidence to reduce inequality and increase diversity. These are all opportunities available to us if we choose to listen, support and encourage each other. Sarah, many thanks for joining me today to talk about this really important topic. Before we get into the detail of our second strategic aim, as our chair, I'd really welcome your reflections on our first aim of being a fair, diverse and inclusive employer.
Sure, thanks, Liz. I think it's really easy to say that we want to be a fair, diverse and inclusive employer, but making that a reality can be where the difficult work starts. And I don't think we can shy away from the fact that it's going to take us quite a lot of effort to move from where we are now to where we aspire to be. But actually, I've got a great opportunity to put my money or my time where my mouth is, because this year we're going to be recruiting into four TPR non-executive director positions, and that's going to start in the next few weeks. And we've got that as an opportunity to set a precedent for including a process that brings in new elements to enable lots more diversity and inclusion. The things that we're looking at doing, we're not changing the world. They sound like quite simple things, but actually they take quite a lot of effort to do. So, for example, we're going to hold an information session for those who are interested in applying, which we've never done before, so that we can demystify the process a bit, try and encourage and support diverse applicants, encourage them to apply, and reassure them that we will share in the effort of being the first, if that's what they're potentially fearful of being. We're going to remove names from CVs and supporting statements. And we're also spending quite a lot of time creating the question sets that we're going to use, where we're really trying to focus on skills and capabilities and not just experience. And for me, it's a real eye-opener just how long and how much effort it's taking to do these things for the first time, rather than just follow the process that we've followed for all the times that we've done this before. But it's absolutely essential that we do it if we're going to display proper commitment to this strategy. And if we're going to say to others in the industry that these are the things that you need to do to improve diversity on your boards as well. And just as a by the way, we are looking to fill one of the roles with someone who's got skills and capabilities in the pensions arena. So if there are people who are potentially interested in the role, I really do encourage you to have a look at the advert when it comes out and think about applying.
And I would certainly echo that. We really want as many people as possible to apply for those board positions. So the aim of solving the pension inequalities in society, it feels like a really ambitious aim. Do you think this is really just for TPR to solve?
No, it's not just for TPR to solve. And to be honest, I don't think people would expect it to be. The inequalities, I would say, for the most part, are not there because of the pensions regulations, and they're not there because of how we regulate. And I think perhaps people wouldn't necessarily have been too surprised if we hadn't included this as part of our strategy. But for me, it's a real demonstration of the commitment of everyone at TPR to the mission of making sure that pensions work for better for everyone. The desire that this objective should be really central to our strategy was supported across the whole organisation. But absolutely, we can't solve it on our own. But I want to put out there that just because something is not necessarily just your responsibility to solve, or mainly your responsibility to solve, doesn't mean you shouldn't speak up about it. And it doesn't mean you should necessarily look to others to deal with it while you get on with something else. I think we have to all call this out and work on it together. And I'm really encouraged by the enthusiasm that there is out there on this issue. In the last few weeks, we've seen our partners at the PRA and the FCA come out with their own work on equality, diversity and inclusion. And we really welcome that work. And it's vital that we continue to work with our partners across regulation, across government, across industry to address these issues and to help achieve this objective. We've also published our joint call for input with the FCA on seeking views on the structural issues that impact pensions consumer journey. And we think there's going to be many elements of that include diversity-related inequalities. And I'm also really pleased with the start of the work on the industry working group, which I know David's going to talk about in a little bit. I think that work will also be key to helping provide the insight that's certainly going to form the bedrock of helping to achieve that objective. Collecting that insight is one thing. Obviously, what's then important is how we turn that into action to help achieve this.
Absolutely. And so you're talking about having that collective understanding and working with others. And does that mean that we'll be starting from scratch at TPR, or can you tell us a little bit about some of the work that's already begun in this area?
Yeah, we certainly won't be starting from scratch. Part and parcel of how we regulate is that we spend a lot of time and effort understanding the landscape that we're operating in. That landscape obviously has changed a lot in the last 15 years since TPR has been in existence. And also it's changed incredibly in the last 10 years. There's been something of a pensions revolution since the introduction of AE, with over 10 million savers being brought into pension savings for the first time. When we developed our corporate strategy, we spent a lot of work and a lot of time digging into that landscape. And that work's provided some really useful information about pensions inequalities in the system as well. So hopefully people will recall that in our strategy, we called out that people of different age groups and people of different income levels can have very different needs, very different challenges, and very different experiences of the pension system, all of which can lead for them to have different outcomes that we as a regulator really need to be mindful of when we're setting our strategy and how we affect those outcomes for them. And our work also looked at the links between protected character and how those characteristics can be linked to pension savers' outcomes. So, for example, we saw how gender and minority ethnic pay gaps and lower rates of employment can lead to worse outcomes for individuals in those groups as a result of that. And the employment rates and average pay in people with disabilities can also affect their retirement saving outcomes. Another group that we got useful information on is about vulnerable savers and that they have particular needs and actually maybe less able to represent their own interests than other savers, something which can be particularly important for our work when we come to look at the decision-making arm of our strategy. And the circumstances and needs of vulnerable savers are really wide-ranging and liable to be driven further affected by health issues. So even something like the pandemic and the coronavirus can exacerbate the circumstances of vulnerable savers and put them into more vulnerable positions. So we've already got lots of really valuable insight like that, but there's lots more to do. And as I've said, not just by us. And then we need to really think about what we do with that insight.
And so you're absolutely right. There's some really good sort of building blocks that have started to be put in place already. But we are very much kind of at the early stages of our work here. And so do you have any ideas at this point about some of the likely areas of work arising from this particular objective for TPR?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that TPR as a whole will have to evolve to really put the saver at the heart of everything that we do. And in this area, we have a public sector equality duty, but we really want to go further than that and ensure that equality, diversity, and inclusion runs through the heart of everything we do. And so for that, to me, means we need a really consistent and systematic approach to this. Not just so that people externally can understand what we're doing, but also so that our internal team and everyone in the organisation can be clear about our strategy and our action plan and how everything that they're doing really ties into achieving this objective. We'll use the outputs of our day job, if you like, our regulation and the insights that we develop that I've just talked about. And that will help us to create a framework that identifies how we believe the pension system could be changed to deliver workplace pensions that work for everyone. There's going to be elements of that fall within our remit, but also areas where we can have the most impact by working with others or by nudging, prompting, or enabling others to act. And something that's really important to me is that we have really meaningful objectives and targets that we can work to and collect robust data about how we're doing. So key performance indicators. This, I think, makes it really clear for individuals to understand how they can actively contribute and where their work is having a real impact. And finally, something that's important for me is to use that understanding and that information we get from key performance indicators to continually evolve how we address this, our strategy and our action plan, and make sure we're always moving forwards. I mean, for me as a risk-based regulator, we always have to prioritize and make difficult decisions about where we spend our regulatory resource. And so when we talk about putting the saver at the heart of everything we do, for me, that means using our analysis of risk and potential harm to savers to really guide our planning and where we spend our time. And I think the benefit of that is we can then use a laser-like focus on outcomes, and focus outcomes in the regulatory world can be quite difficult and sometimes quite a theoretical measurement challenge. But I think here we can use focus on outcomes to really be a key driver in our decision-making here. Now, I'm very conscious that everything I've said there, establishing that sort of framework doesn't happen overnight, but I am convinced that particularly in this area, it's absolutely worth the effort.
And obviously, one way that we can really start to tackle inequalities is by driving diversity and inclusion in our regulated community, which is our third strategic aim, which David is going to talk about in a moment. Really interested in talking to you as somebody who's been in the pensions industry for a little while now. I'd like to hear your reflections on how far the industry has come and what more we might need to do.
Sure. Well, I first became a trustee at the age of 32 and a professional trustee at the age of 35. And coming from the financial services industry, I was quite used by that time to being in a significant minority as a female in the room, sometimes the only female in the room. And when I moved into the trustee world, I also then became often the youngest person in the room by quite some margin. And I remember when I first took on a trustee role, and it was just when TPR was first established, I was using some concepts that TPR was introducing, such as debt on the employer, which was unknown to my fellow trustees, not something they were familiar with. And they just looked at me like I was talking a completely different language. And I really understood then how much effort and how off-putting it was to feel like you're on a completely different wavelength to other people in the room for you, and how hard that is. And that's why for me, this really is about the power of three: equality, diversity, and inclusion. If we don't get all of those together, and if we're not inclusive in our efforts that we put into diversity, then we really won't get the output from this that we want to. When I applied for trustee and other board roles, I was frequently told at that time, Sarah, we're looking for someone with more experience. We're looking for someone with 30 years experience in the city. And I found that an incredibly frustrating thing to hear, because I said, well, tell me what skills and capabilities you're looking for, and I can speak to that. But I can't speak about an age gap or an age barrier because I can't change anything about that. The industry absolutely has made huge strides since then. I'm really encouraged by the improved diversity that I see within trustee boards and also within professional trustee bodies. But I think we have to recognise that we're starting from a very low base, and there is still a long way to go. And I think there's still much more to do to be really inclusive to people from different backgrounds and with different perspectives. And also to be open about how we can assess whether people are bringing the right capabilities rather than just experience. Now, I recognise, as I said at the beginning, that all of that, it does not come easy. But I think we need to support each other on the road ahead, and also be prepared to ask ourselves some really challenging and perhaps uncomfortable questions if we are together to succeed in this.
Thank you so much for your time today, Sarah. It's been really interesting to hear your perspective and also to hear about your own personal experiences. And I know much of that is what you're bringing as we look to expand our board with those extra NED roles. And so just a quick shout out to all of you again. Do look out for the advert when we put it out there, because we would like a really wide field of candidates to apply. I'm now going to hand over to David Fairs, and he's going to introduce our final session before we move on to the Q&A.
I'm David Fairs, Executive Director of Regulatory Policy Analysis and Advice at the Pensions Regulator. I'm one of the co-sponsors of our EDI strategy, and it's my pleasure to introduce this discussion about our industry-led working group. We committed to establishing a vehicle like this so that we might explore ways of supporting schemes to create diverse and inclusive trustee boards. We also hope that the work will spark more consideration and conversations about the benefits of diversity and inclusion. As has been obvious for some time, our industry struggles when it comes to diversity. And this means some savers, clients, customers aren't seeing their concerns or aspirations reflected on. The working group will bring together representatives from the pensions industry and the regulator. Today, we'll hear how this is intended to work and how we'll deliver on our aspirations. You can expect some discussion about our conception of diversity and inclusion, the opportunities and challenges ahead, like identifying barriers and how we might overcome them, possibly a few thoughts on the current topography of the industry and how we might measure progress. And with those thoughts in mind, I'd like to welcome and introduce Kim Brown, Pension Scheme Director at Legal and General Master Trust and the IGC, and Harris Ray, Head of Sole Trusteeship at Capital Cranfield, to begin this conversation. Kim, I'll come to you first, if I may. And you have taken up the role of co-chair on one of the subgroups of the D&I industry-led working group, along with Hadassah Schulman, who I'm delighted to say will also be joining us on the panel for the Q&A session later. Can you perhaps tell me about some of the work that you've been doing to date within your subgroup and some of the specific issues you've been focusing on in helping schemes to create diverse and inclusive trustee boards.
Thanks, David. Yes, I'm happy to. Hadassah and I have been committee looking at practical tools, case studies and inclusive materials. To deliver that, we want to make sure that these are materials that can be used by trustee boards of any size, regardless of how large or resourced their pensions teams are. And we've been focusing on two areas. So first up, we want to look at how to run an inclusive board. And we want to identify the barriers and behaviours preventing inclusive boards currently. And then case studies for what good looks like, what an inclusive board feels and looks like. From doing that, we'll then be able to prepare some tips for chairs so that they can work with their trustees on reviewing how inclusive they are, but also on that to support that chair in running an inclusive meeting themselves. We also want to prepare some tools for others that are key in the running of meetings, like scheme advisors, and for individuals on boards themselves, so how you might pose healthy challenges and provide feedback. Secondly, the group are looking at how you recruit diverse boards. And again, we want to start with what the barriers are. So why aren't we seeing a wide range of applications for roles? And then we want to hear from some recruiters who've really been able to break through those barriers and been able to recruit people from different backgrounds, etc., onto boards. And also hear from individuals themselves that have had to overcome those barriers and what attracted them to trusteeship and how they've been successful. And again, we want to develop some templates for trustees. We want to provide some really useful outputs that people can use. And that can include something like an advert template for member-nominated trustees, or a tool for trustees to use to self-assess what their aims and objectives and approach to diversity and inclusion is.
Harris, you also sit as a co-chair on one of the subgroups, but also I think you sit on the Association of Professional Pension Trustees, the APPT, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So perhaps you can tell us about some of the things that you've been up to.
Absolutely. So I'll echo the comments that Kim has said in terms of some of the output. I think the output from both the Regulators Working Group and the APPT's D&I committee is going to be around education. It's going to be around how you promote D&I and how you can make boards more inclusive. But they are looking at two different things. So from the Regulators Working Group, we're looking at trustees in general. And obviously from the APPT, we're looking at the professional arena. And there we're looking at seeing how we can, as I say, further promote and educate our members on the topic of diversity and inclusion. So I'm sitting on, as you said, David, I'm the co-chair of the Standards, Best Practice and Board Composition Working Group. And I'm co-chairing that with Daniel Gehring, who is the head of pensions at Travers Smith. And what we are looking at, there's going to be some overlap between the four working groups that there are. And what we are looking at is some standards and best practices around what is the role of the chair, around board composition, what exactly is what we're expecting from MNTs, from ENTs, and from professional trustees. And similar to what Kim is looking at in her group is how can we have best practice around recruitment and retain, and there's challenges within that, and improving inclusiveness. You know, this is diversity and inclusive is what we're looking at. So it's not just having diverse boards, it's having inclusive boards. So those are the areas that we're going to be looking at. And as Kim has said, the output is going to be very much based around education. It's going to be based around training, around tips, guidance, case studies, anything that can help support the evolution of D&I in the pension industry.
Thanks. I mean, both of you, from the work that you've done to date, must have come across good practice, best practice. Perhaps you might give us some examples of ones that we at TPR should be particularly aware of.
Yeah, so David, I'll pick this one up first, if that's okay. So I'm going to move away from pensions, if that's all right. So I've been looking at D&I over the past few months and over the past year. And what you've seen is companies in the FTSE sector have actually done a lot of work and are further ahead in diversity and inclusion than, say, the pensions industry. And looking at those, there are common themes. There's common themes in terms of having clear and meaningful goals. And I'll give you an example. Uber's own D&I quote, a quote from Uber's own strategy states that reducing and eliminating inequality is hard to do if all you're shooting for is incremental change. So they have a clear and meaningful policy as to what they're trying to achieve. And when you also then look at what the firms have done, there are common themes. And there's many of those, but I'll just touch on 3 of those if that's okay. First is positive words. Words such as celebrate, empower, authentic, welcome are throughout their strategies. Second is simple statements. If you look at T-Mobile, they only use 8 words per sentence. Then there's another firm called GeneTech who uses an average 8.9 words per sentence whenever they're delivering a message. And the final one is they've looked at actually the reading level equivalent. So GoDaddy.com is famous for having a reading level equivalent of age 13. And then you have another body called Oath, whose reading level equivalent is 11. So if they've done that, not to make it patronizing, it's not to be patronizing, but what their research has showed them is the simpler the message, the easier it is to retain and absorb. And that's what we can learn. We're going to deal with a lot of complication, and it's going to be hard along the road. But it doesn't mean that our strategies and our solutions have to be overcomplicated. And I think that's what we can learn from other areas.
Thanks, Harris. Kim, what do you think?
I think something I'd really commend the industry for, and the work I've seen across various organisations, their highlighting of inequalities in the pension system. So we now have really significant evidence base showing how women are losing out in pensions. If I use data from our Master Trust at Legal & General, we've shown that women are now going to receive a 60% lower pension than their male counterpart. And I think the problem is really well understood now, and we need to collectively move this conversation forward. So from not focusing on how terrible this is to what we can collectively do about it. And I think there's a number of different channels that could be explored there. And that can include possible legislative change, but also how we work collaboratively with other providers, employers, and ultimately members on highlighting and educating this issue. And I know at Legal & General, we, for instance, launched a gender pensions task force. And I think the regulator, if you're looking for examples of things that are happening that you can really throw your support and weight behind, I think this is a really good one in partnership with other regulators and lawmakers.
Thank you. I mean, Kim, you touched on there that some of the issues are well understood. And you and Harris and I have been talking about diversity and inclusion for some time. But what are the barriers? What do you consistently hear are the barriers to making pension scheme boards truly diverse and inclusive? And how, as an industry, are we going to overcome that?
I think probably the most quoted barrier is resource. I think that's what you'd hear if you ask people as to why this isn't changing, why it's not changing more quickly. And schemes are growing and consolidating, and regulatory requirements and expectations increasing. You know, we have to balance competing priorities around particularly things like climate. But really, I think, therefore, TPR needs to be clear and continue to be clear about, your prioritisation of this across trustees and those with the power to appoint trustees. So I think that's the one that's most quoted. Whether that's the biggest barrier, I'm not sure. I think really what's key is going to be that we take everyone along with us on this. I think we hear as an industry terms like stale really frequently. And I don't think that helps the business case for inclusivity. I think that's instead probably making the people that identify with one or many of those characteristics feel perhaps less included. So I think we really need to, with that mindset in with us, demonstrate to all the benefits of a diverse board. And then I hope that really everyone would lend the support to this being a really positive development.
Yeah, I'll add to that. So I think it's important we also look at the non-D&I barriers, so which will stop us from having diversity in the pension industry. And we constantly talk about the employer has the ability to create more diversity in trustee boards. And that's a lot easier when you look at employer-nominated trustees than it is with member-nominated trustees. If you look at most schemes now, lots of defined benefit schemes are becoming more and more close to future accrual. You've got situations where members no longer work for a sponsor. So they'll be working for somebody else and potentially a competitor. And what happens with that individual is they are going to their new sponsor and they're saying, excuse me, can I please take some time out of my working day to go and work for one of the competitors' pension scheme? It's not the easiest sell to your current employer. And in turn, the sponsoring employer of our pension scheme is saying, well, why do I want that MNT who is worked for a competitor who is now going to have confidential information about our business? So that's a barrier. And I'm hoping that as part of the working groups that we look to see how we can put together some solutions to tackle that. Because unless we can tackle that, we're not going to find member-nominated trustees.
Thanks. So we've touched a little bit on the landscape, but how do you see the landscape? How do you think it's going to evolve in the future, and how do we know whether we're going to be successful? How are we going to measure that success?
Measuring success is an interesting one because I think that's going to come to more diverse boards, more inclusive boards. I think what's happening in the industry is we're doing a lot of good work. There's a lot of good work that's going on. You're seeing that across the board. We're just touching the surface. And what I've seen in a lot of conversations, it's been more about visual characteristics or visible characteristics of diversity, age, gender, ethnicity. And Kim, you talked earlier around the boards of older white males. And you can look at me, I'm a professional trustee and I'm in my 40s and I'm obviously from an ethnic minority. And you could put me on that board and you could say, well, there's an obvious visual differentiator. But what you can't see, right, from visually looking at me, is that I have a daughter who is sight impaired. Okay, that is a personal diversity. There's a diversity on a personal level. When we then look at those boards of older white men, well, we're not looking under the bonnet and saying, well, actually, is there a personal level of diversity? And what I've seen is that this D&I topic, there's so many facets to it. And it's such an evolving piece that the only way we're going to evolve our industry is through education. And we'll come back to that a lot. And I think as a minimum, what I'm hoping the working group comes out with is education in terms of training tools and picking up on the points that Kim said earlier, the case studies, the principles, the guidance. That's as a minimum as what we should be trying to achieve. And that will help us evolve D&I in the industry.
Couldn't agree more with what Harris is saying there, really. And I also sit on Next Gen Trustees, and we've done research into cognitive diversity from that same angle. You know, if we are recruiting a more diverse board in terms of gender, does that provide that diversity of thinking to lead to better governance and risk management if they all come from the same educational background, etc.? It is looking at diversity in its widest form. And I think really we're starting to see, I think, within the industry, greater representation. I think the other thing we're really starting to see is the industry coming together with network groups, with initiatives, looking at how we support and introduce new voices. And I think that's great. I think ultimately, in terms of measuring success and TPR's role, I imagine we're starting off the discussion today. We're talking about what expectations are and what best practice might be. From there, I imagine you're going to start looking at how schemes are performing against those. And ultimately, a bit to Harris's point on, is there more diversity on trustees? You're going to be looking at outcomes over the longer term rather than just the good intentions and outcomes and actions that are being taken. And I think data is critical there, isn't it? We need to be able to establish our current position, understand what we're looking for and what we need to do, and then be able to monitor that over time. And I think probably my last point would be, we've seen how ESG or environmental, social and governance factors can really be that key to engaging members, particularly younger savers. Ambitious now where we know how difficult it is to engage members, but I would like to see in time, trustees and all of this really starting to be held account as an industry on matters like these.
Thank you. And I'm really excited about the journey that we're on. I just want to thank you for your time today, but also actually the time that you and all the other volunteers are giving to help us try and advance this journey. Thank you for the great work that you're doing. I'm sure we'll invite you back and hear more about progress in due course. But now I'd like to hand back over to Liz to introduce the panel Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was a real insight into the work that has already begun. If you haven't already, there's now an opportunity to submit questions to the panel on what you've heard so far. To submit a question, just click on the box under your video player, type in your question and press submit. Myself and the other panellists will be joined by two new speakers, another fellow colleague, Charlotte Whitewick, our policy business lead, and Hadassah Shulman, a senior associate for Cameron McKenna Navarro Olswang and a co-chair for the Practical Tools subgroup for the D&I industry-led working group. We're going to give you a couple of minutes to submit your questions and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back. It looks like we have got quite a few questions queued up, so let's crack on. So I'm going to go to Charlotte Whitewick for our first question, which is from Nia. The financial regulators, FCA, PRA and Bank of England, also seem keen to accelerate change and improve diversity and inclusion in the financial sector. How do you think the work that TPR is doing will align with the other regulators?
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Liz. So in a nutshell, I think really well. I think that we've already started some conversations with some of the other regulators, both the financial regulators that you've mentioned there, but also more widely through the UK regulators network, which includes regulators from across the landscape. And I think there are things that we can learn in different ways from our regulatory colleagues. So we've been talking in some of those network groups about what happens for us all as employers. And for example, one of the things that we in TPR know that we need to do is improve the number of people who report on their diversity characteristics so that we can understand more about what's going on within the organisation. One of the other regulators has recently done quite a lot of work on that, really improved their rate. So that's an example where we're going to directly learn from one another on that. On the financial side, more specifically in thinking about how we work together, as I think some of the other speakers have already alluded to, actually, there are lots of links between us in terms of thinking about our workforces, and I mean in terms of the regulated community. So pensions experts, in some ways, are quite a narrow group, but actually form part of that wider financial ecosystem. So there are definitely some links there when we're thinking about how we encourage a wider group of people to become trustees, for example. But I think there are wider things that we can learn there as well. So a huge amount. And as I say, we've started some of those conversations. We've got some more planned over the summer. And I think it's a really exciting area to work with colleagues on.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Hadassah, I'm going to come to you with a question from AJ. We've heard from Kim about the work of the Practical Tools subgroup. You're also co-chair with Kim. From your perspective, what are the things that you're looking forward to doing with the group? And how do you see the work of the subgroup developing over the next 3 to 6 months?
Thanks. I'm really looking forward mostly to working with such a really passionate group of people and learning from their experiences. We're really lucky that there's been a real range of volunteers from across the industry who are all approaching this from a different perspective. And I think that's going to create some really interesting discussions that are going to help us to ultimately create some tools that are really, really useful. And I think that is the key here, is making things that are useful to as many schemes of any shape and size as we possibly can. And our work over the next 3 to 6 months is really going to be focused on that. And that's going to include considering what other angles we can look at this from, because it is one of those things that once you start looking, you then learn what you don't know and see things from perspectives that you haven't yet approached it from. And taking on feedback so that we can make these, as I say, as useful as possible for as many schemes as possible.
That's great, thank you. And then I'm just going to start with Charles, if that's okay, for our next question, and then open it up to others. Jane asks, cognitive diversity and social background diversity hasn't been mentioned, but it is crucial to encourage proper debate. How will we address it?
Thanks very much, and great question. Let me start with the second part of the question, which is about socioeconomic diversity, if you like. Look, I think it's a great point, and it is really important that we have a focus on that. I think let me talk a little bit about what we're doing internally on it. And I think the first thing for us as an organisation is to reach out better into our local community and to form better alliances into our community to encourage people to come to join us, ensure that they understand that we're an exciting place to work. I guess having the nameplate on the door, Pensions Regulator, doesn't always shout excitement, but it is. And so we've got to, we really want to do a big drive to encourage people to join us from our local community. In some ways, we started that through our apprentice programme, and we've had a number of apprentices coming through, and we continue to drive that apprentice programme forward. But also, look, we recognise that there are some areas of the organisation where we have skill gaps, difficult to recruit, and perhaps structurally those sectors also are not as diverse as they could be. And so we're looking at whether or not we can bring people in at the most junior levels to train them and train them up. And that's another way that we can both increase our diversity across the board, but also our social economic diversity. In terms of neurodiversity, I might pass to David in a moment, because I know the Disability Network has done some really interesting stuff on neurodiversity and how important that is, and indeed how we might take that into account. So David, are you able to pick up on that?
A little. Thank you, Charles. I think it's fair to say that the TPR internally, we've started the dialogue around neurodiversity. And I think it wouldn't, it's fair to say we're at the start of that journey. We understand that neurodiversity, the concept that all human beings vary in terms of their neurocognitive ability. Everyone has talents and everyone has things they struggle with. And we recognise that those talents can be really, really important to an organisation like TPR, and for that matter, throughout the industry. When we think about neurodiversity, a salient factor for me that 90% of the disabled population have invisible disabilities. So we're talking about one of the wide variety of neurodiverse conditions. But when you think about it, it's easy to get carried away with I'm tempted to say the negative side, but what is more important to me is the attributes that all those people bring. Clearly beneficial to us, but everywhere else. People with neurodivergent conditions, those that fall outside the neurotypical population, they don't have all these conditions, but very often they're sensitive, they're empathic, they're honest, they're creative, they're innovative, they're good at problem solving, and there's a whole list of others as well. I'm happy to list off all the positive attributes, but I think you'll get the message I'm trying to give there.
That's great. Thanks so much, David. And Harris, I wondered if you had any sort of updates on that area in particular, the work that the industry working group are doing in those areas.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that there's so many different types of diversity. We have to understand that. There's, as I mentioned earlier, you've got visible characteristics of diversity where you've got age, gender. Those are things which are quite obvious when you look at somebody. But we also have to think about the cognitive diversity. We think about diversity of thought and the backgrounds of individuals. And I can say that as part of the working group, and I know I'm speaking for the other groups here as well, but we're going to be looking at as many of these as we possibly can. One of the things Odessa talked about was what are we going to do over the next 3 to 6 months? But it's more than that. It's about what are we going to do thereafter, because whatever we put in place, try to increase diversity inclusion in the pensions industry, it will change next year because views will change and society will change. And it is therefore important that we don't just put in place rigid structures, we put in place structures that can evolve, and that covers many different types of diversity.
That's great. Thank you so much. And that actually gives us a springboard into our next question from Gary, which says, David said that trustee boards are not as diverse as they should be, but on what basis are you measuring this? Are you only measuring on the easy metrics of gender, age, ethnicity, rather than arguably the more important criteria of diversity of thinking and background? Was there anything further that you wanted to add there, Harris? And Charlotte, I was also going to come to you from the perspective of the work we're doing as TPR.
Yeah, I don't think it's just being measured on gender, age, and ethnicity. And as I said, that comes back to those very physical characteristics. I would challenge the comment that the other criteria, so diversity of thinking and background, are more important. I think all types of diversity are important, and I think it's important that we have, in terms of diversity and inclusion, that we have a breadth of individuals who can think differently. That's I think what we're trying to achieve. In terms of are trustee boards diverse? I wouldn't say that all trustee boards are not diverse. I would say there are some trustee boards where diversity is an issue, especially when you look at boards where they are struggling to find trustees, where we're struggling to find member-nominated trustees. So you may just have people from the company. It can still be diverse, but it's not necessarily every board, but there are definitely cases where some boards are really struggling.
That's great, thank you. And Charlotte, is there anything in particular you wanted to draw out about the work that TPR is doing, or are we covered?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously the speakers who've gone before have covered a lot of what I would have said there, so that's fantastic. I think just a couple of things. So in terms of how we're measuring, I think one of the things that's really difficult is actually at the moment there is limited amounts of information out there, and both we collect and within the wider industry that there's a limited amount of information about what is collected, so what we actually know about trustee boards. And that's one of the things that one of the subgroups looking at data, that's one of the things that they're kind of looking at and trying to tackle at the moment. And what might we need in the future to give us a better understanding of what's actually going on with different boards. So that's one thing where I'd say there's work to do there. I think other speakers then have very much picked up the points that I think a range of characteristics is important when we're looking and thinking about diversity. I'd go back to as well, though, there's no point having diversity unless you have inclusion. And so inclusive boards for me are just as important as diverse boards. You have people on boards who come from all sorts of different backgrounds, all sorts of different characteristics. They don't feel safe to speak out. If meetings aren't organised in a way that means that they can contribute and participate and go to them, then it doesn't matter that, you know, your figures look good, as it were. Actually, if you don't have that inclusion as well, then that's going to be an issue. And that's much more difficult for us to measure. That is more difficult for us to understand. But I think that's the really important prize there.
That's great, thank you. And Charles, I'm going to come to you with a question that's really goes to the heart of us getting our own house in order. So how many staff does TPR have, and how many of those are from ethnic minorities or have some form of disability? And that's asked by Roger.
Thanks, Roger. Important question, important to make sure that we do have the data. So look, approximately at the end of last financial year, we had approximately 150 people working for us. Of those, 7% declared that they were from a Black, Asian or ethnic minority background, which is about the same as the previous year, 1920. 77% declared that they were white, which is a decrease of 2% from last year. Perhaps crucially, no one on the senior team, and what do we mean by that? We mean the CEO, the executive directors, the directors and the heads of, declared that they were Black, Asian, or from ethnic minorities. In terms of disabilities, across all of our colleagues, 5% told us that they have a disability, 82% did not declare a disability, and of the senior team, 7% declared a disability. I want to pick up on something that Charlotte said earlier, because of course it really is important that we are able to have accurate information here. And so I think our declarations are okay, but we are really keen to improve that. And so, as Charlotte said earlier, keen to learn from other organisations where they have increased the declarations, because the more we've got this data, the more we're able to do something about it and feel that the actions that we're taking, we can rely on the impact that it's having.
That's great, thank you. And we've just got time for 2 more questions. So I'm going to go to our networks with the next one. It's estimated that 20% of working age people are carers and have their own specific issues. Do you have a carers network in TPR? How are you representing carers' interests in your regulatory activities? And I know that we do try to do this across several of our networks. So David, I wondered if I could start with you and then briefly go to Tess and to Alicia as well.
Certainly, thank you, Liz. It's fair to say at this moment in time, we do not have a dedicated carers network, but I can tell you that we're in the process of forming one. It's being led by someone who isn't here today, but they're in the process of getting one, because we recognise that carers play such an important role in sustaining what a lot of us do, and their associates, their family members, friends outside of work as well. Now, within the Disability Network, we have several individual members who are carers, so very close to our hearts as well. And I suspect what we'll find is there'll be carers throughout all the networks, because for a lot of carers, the focus is on the individual we're caring for. So I suppose the short answer is, are we doing anything about carers? Yes, we are. We're going to be doing more. And I know that the person who is leading that up and is engaged with our HR to get it going is very keen, very well connected as far as the wider carer network is concerned, elsewhere across government as well. So I think we'll see great things in support of carers in the future.
That's great. Thank you, David. And Tess, I think you are kind of up to speed on some of the cross-network activity that's happening in this area.
Yeah, so as David said, hopefully we'll have a carers network soon. But in the meantime, we recognise that there's some issues, like issues that carers face, that are really intersectional. So carers, the work of carers might fall under the Women's Network, it might fall under the Disability Network, or sometimes the Time to Change Network. So what we've really focused on as diversity networks over the last year is making sure that our work is coordinated. We now have a cross-chairs network, and for things like World Carers Day, we made sure that we put out some communications, we put out some information which had some signposting for carers. So it really does, working in that way across networks really does ensure, or we hope that it really ensures, that issues like that are picked up.
That's great. And Alicia, obviously running our champions, Time to Change champions who support those with mental health challenges at TPR. This year has been a particularly busy time, and you also offer significant support to carers among our community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're very aware of the impact that having a caring role can have on your well-being and your mental health, and also the role you can play if you are caring for someone else with a mental health condition. So it's something we're very aware of. One of our co-sponsors for the network is a carer who wrote a really brilliant piece of comms for Mental Health Awareness Week earlier this year, which I think really highlighted the role and importance of carers and the impacts that can have on them. So as David said, there is movement in this space, but lots to do, and really looking forward to seeing what happens next as the network gets up and running.
Thank you, that's brilliant. And sticking with the subject of our networks for our last question, I think there's a certain nice logic to that, really, because we know that we have to start looking at ourselves first and get out there and try to change the world. So we come back to ourselves at the end. So Dan and Lisa, I wondered if you could maybe give us a sense for this question. What would your target end goal for the diversity networks be? And would it be that change was such that the networks would no longer be required? Or is that an unrealistic or undesirable goal? So Lisa, I'd be interested to hear your views on that. I think you might be on mute. I can't hear you. I still can't hear you, I'm sorry. I don't know why that's happening.
Liz, would you
Dan,
like me to...
Okay. Dan, I wondered if in the meantime you could maybe come in with a view on that question.
Of course. I mean, I guess it's probably quite challenging to say that I think it's an unrealistic expectation that we would ever enter a society where there wasn't a need for employee networks. While we might be able to do great work dealing with some of the problems, the barriers that exist here and now in the 21st century, there's no telling whether or not some more issues might occur later down the line. So I would see a great value for the networks being there as a continuing and evolving mechanism to make sure that as we go forward, all groups continue to be represented, not just those that we've outlined right now as needing help or attention.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm just going to give Lisa one last fingers crossed for the microphone. No, it's still not working. I'm so sorry. Oh, Harris, would you like to come in on the question on networks?
Yeah, if that's all right. I mean, personally, I don't see any reason why the network should stop. There's a really useful study by Deloitte and the Billie Jean King Leadership Initiative, which said that if they look at diversity and inclusion, and they looked at it in many different facets, and they centered on millennials and non-millennials on one of those, so the older generation. And what they said was that millennials, it was a very generalistic comment. They said millennials generally look at diversity and inclusion as team building, collaborative, better, bringing different ideas together. The non-millennials, maybe the older generation, looked at D&I as fairness, equality, and civil rights, and breaking down barriers. What it shows is actually D&I changes, and it will change as the society evolves. And therefore, these networks are going to be important to be able to tap into that so that we can evolve D&I in the industry as well as in society.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think we basically made our way through that webinar with only one small technical hitch towards the end. So I'm feeling very delighted with all of us, given how hot the weather is and how much we're all flagging. The technology has managed to stay on song, which is super. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining us, for asking such interesting questions. So thank you to our panel, and thank you to the audience for such interesting questions. I'd like to draw our discussion to a close with a reminder of the key messages we've heard today. The status quo is not acceptable, and it is crucial we continue to challenge ourselves so that diversity and inclusion are not simply seen as desirable, but that they are embedded across everything that we do. We will be looking to the pensions industry to work with us and work together to bring real improvements in diversity in relation to decision-making across the sector. We know that this will improve the quality of decisions, and it will mean that trustee boards better reflect the diversity that we see amongst our savers. We hope you found the webinar useful. You'll be able to download our useful links document from the resource tab in the delegate area. The webinar recording will be available to watch again from tomorrow by navigating back to this page. And finally, We really appreciate your feedback on this webinar, so please do complete the survey so that we can continue to improve our events in the future. To do this, please navigate to the top of the menu bar to the left-hand side of the video player or via the polling window to the right. I want to thank all of our speakers today who've given up their time to come and talk to us about these important issues and who've been open enough to share their own experiences so that we can all learn from them. And of course, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And now you can go and enjoy the sunshine. Thank you.